Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Hello, and welcome to Labor Vision, the at-home edition. I'm your host, Autumn Guillotte, and today we're going to talk about a very exciting push to decarbonize our public school buildings by shifting them from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. To talk about this, I have several guests, so I'm just going to ask you to go around and introduce yourselves. Erica, you can start as a Labor Vision veteran.
All right, thank you so much for having us, Autumn. My name is Erica Hammond, and I am an organizer with Climate Jobs Rhode Island, and I will pass it over to my colleague, Mike.
Hey everybody, my name is Mike Rolls, and I am the policy lead with Climate Jobs Rhode Island, and I'll pass it off to our co-chair, Priscilla.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm Priscilla De La Cruz. I go by she, her, hers. I wear a few different hats, as Mike mentioned. I'm the co-chair of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. My daytime full-time job is with the Audubon Society of Rhode Island as their senior policy director, and I am also the president of the Environment Council of Rhode Island. And I will pass it over to the one and only Justin.
All right, thank you so much, Priscilla. I'm Justin Kelly with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 11. And I also serve as the chairman of the Organizing and Business Development Committee for the Rhode Island Building and Construction Trades Council. I'm very happy to be here to join you all today to talk about this important work.
Great. So I think we should just jump right in. And I'm going to ask a very broad question. What is the Green and Healthy Schools Initiative? Maybe Erica, you can start with that.
I'll start. So the Green and Healthy Schools campaign is an effort to fully transition all of our public K through 12 schools in Rhode Island to clean energy or green energy, shifting to carbon free. So the goal is, as the state shifts to carbon free and to a green future, our goal is to start with the school buildings for as our first step. So the goal is to make this transition by 2030. And that's why we're calling for a school bond, an additional school construction bond on the 2022 ballot, which I know we'll probably get into more detail, but that's the broad overview of the campaign.
So you have multiple organizations here. Priscilla, I wanted to ask you, with your many roles, but you're also a part of the Audubon Society. Why is your organization really about this initiative?
Well, I think the initiative, it offers an opportunity to really center climate as we're working to decarbonize and improve schools for children. We're also improving public health, and by centering climate and centering equity and labor, I mean, it's an all-around win-win because we're tackling two important areas that are really essential for, I think, the Rhode Island economy is how do we really address the climate crisis and ensure that we have a thriving and sustainable initiative. Economy, I should say. And this initiative really does that. It really tackles the environmental side and also the economic benefits that it offers. And specifically for Audubon, we co-led with our partners and working with Climate Jobs Rhode Island to lead to the successful passage of the Act on Climate. So it's a landmark piece of legislation that really calls on our state government and requires it to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we must do that in a way that it is binding, it is enforceable, and it's required. And it has to be transparent how we get to that as well. And one of the interim targets is getting to 40% carbon pollution reduction by 2040. And then we have another interim target, by 2030, we have to reduce 40%. So what better way of doing that and starting in the state, leading by example and saying, we're going to center public health, we're going to center climate, we're going to center labor. And as we're doing this to decarbonize our schools, to meet the Act on Climate goals, we're also going to center equity. And I hope we have more time to really dive into that and what we're proposing as a part of that. But it's really essential and critical that we do meet the targets of the Act on Climate. The climate change crisis is only intensifying. So science is telling us we have to do that, and we have to do that in very smart and practical ways. So I'm really proud that Audubon and other environmental groups have joined labor to launch this Green and Healthy Schools initiative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that environmental groups such as yours have always been on point about pointing out climate change and the changes we need to do to prevent the worst effects of it. But it's so nice to see that we're now joining these efforts with the labor community. I read that this initiative could possibly create more than 11,000 jobs over the total of 9 years of doing this work. Justin, could you speak a little bit to your background with building trades and everything in supporting this initiative?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's something where we're, very happy to be on board with this initiative and be a part of the overall Climate Jobs Rhode Island Coalition. It's sorely needed. I mean, I think anybody that has, eyes in their head and just is living their life, can see that there are severe effects of climate change. And, we're not climate change deniers. We're not ignorant to the issues that are ongoing in, around our world, in our country and in the state of Rhode Island. But, the reality is that this gives us a great opportunity to kind of align our values in the Building and Construction Trades Council and our 10,000, to be able to give a chance to put our 10,000 plus members to work in the 16 different affiliate crafts, doing something that's sorely needed, which is renovating and building new schools across the state. The reality is that in addition to the crisis of climate change, you can see that these buildings long ago needed to either be totally repaired and revamped or built brand new, because we're looking at something where it's a shame that our buildings are not already up to speed when we're still going through this pandemic, where there's still a situation where we don't have proper ventilation in buildings, where we don't have proper energy efficiency in buildings. And so this is something where we're very excited to see as you said, Autumn, thousands of jobs being created for the better part of a decade to make sure that these schools are in the place where they need to be so that our students, our teachers are valued, understood that this is something that should have been done a long time ago, but also that we can offer a career opportunity to people. And I just want to touch briefly on that part of this. We work very closely with a pre-apprenticeship program called Building Futures. I'm a graduate of Building Futures. Most of the people who graduate from Building Futures all of the people who graduate from Building Futures are low income. Most of the people are people of color, 80%. And we're doing a lot of outreach and efforts to ensure that we're creating more opportunities for women in trades. So the pre-apprenticeship model, apprenticeship, these things work. They work to give people a chance to go to work hard, learn a skill set, and provide a middle-class living for themselves and their family. And what better way to do that than to build high-quality, state-of-the-art schools across the state?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many angles and aspects to the benefits of this program, but I'm wondering exactly how we plan to get this through. Erica, you had touched upon a bond and some of the spending and financing that could go into it. I was wondering if you and Mike could expand on that a little bit.
Mike, I don't know do you want to jump into some of the details on this, the language in the school construction bond that you've been working on first?
Sure, I don't want to get into the weeds, but we're calling for a $300 million bond here that has the strong labor standards that increase access to quality jobs. That includes apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship utilization, the prevailing wage stuff, PLAs, and then it also has big incentives that basically allow and enable school districts where it makes financial sense to do the upfront costs, to do the energy efficiency upgrades, the on-site renewable energy installations. In 2018, the $250 million bond produced $1.4 billion of construction. We're looking at about $2.4 billion up to 2030 to be able to get, the schools where we need to be, where they're on the path to net zero. So we're anticipating, the $300 million bond to be a down payment to get us on that track, and then to be able to, get those healthy green schools that we're looking for. This is a multi-year effort, so the $300 million bond isn't going to be the singular solution here, but it is going to, launch us in that direction that we need it to go.
And if I can add to that as well, in addition to calling for that bond, we're also asking the state to look very closely at how they're spending the federal dollars that are coming into the state. So in particular, we did call out the American Rescue Plan Act and those dollars that the state has on hand, and really asking the state to think about, as it's making allocation and investment, how do you center again climate and in terms of getting our economy back on track. And I think that this initiative, again, is a great example of that. And of course, the state, has many critical crises that it's trying to address. But the key is to do this in a very smart way. If you're going to be making investments, and I think schools is a really great example of that, they should be energy efficient. We should be addressing the health hazards in those schools. They should have solar panels on them. And this is really going to put us on that path that we described to meeting those targets of the Act on Climate, because the Act on Climate says we have to get to net zero by 2050, but there are critical milestones that have to be reached by then. So I just wanted to highlight again that that's why we're really aligning the initiative with that policy of the Act on Climate and saying, if we really want to get to 2030, 40% carbon emission reductions by then, you have to decarbonize schools. I mean, we have to address what's going on in the building sector.
That's a great point, Priscilla. And I think that it's, we look at doing something like building schools with, this money that came through from the federal government, and it's coming from, the future bond initiatives, here in the state. They're catalyzing projects, right? They create an economic catalyzation in all of our communities. And, it's something where maybe there's a few communities that didn't quite understand that the first time around. Well, there's going to be second and third bites of the apple so that we can make sure that people have the opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to invest in our future and our kids, but we're going to do it in the right way. We're going to build these buildings so that they're energy efficient, so that the windows are installed correctly, so that there's not leaks going out. The building envelope is built correctly, so that there's solar panels and renewable energy built in there, that the energy systems in the building are as efficient as possible, that they're, all of these things are a example for the rest of the public sector. So after schools are done, we should move on to the rest of the buildings that exist in the state that are owned by municipalities or by the state. And then an example for the private sector. There are very large private sector actors, universities, hospitals. They have a responsibility to the community and to their workforce to make sure that they're doing the right thing so that our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids have a planet to live on.
And just to piggyback that a little bit, when we're thinking about this on even a national level too, our friends over at Undaunting K through 12 had shared with us some of their facts and research that they had done. And a number that stuck out to me was that 1 in 6 Americans step foot in a public school daily, or maybe weekdays. So we're not just talking about students and teachers, we're talking about all of the entire school community, the lunch aides, the counselors, everybody that you can think of who's walking in a public school every day shouldn't have to worry about, or should not worry about, which bubbler they're drinking from. Are they drinking from a bubbler with high lead levels, which was an alarming number for, I think, both Mike and I to see when we were looking at some of this research, is then how high lead levels are in some of the bubblers and sinks in public schools throughout the state. Also, I know that I went to public schools. I grew up in Warwick and went to Pilgrim High School. And I know that a big problem throughout high school was teachers and students and staff members having terrible asthma problems from the mold inside of the school. One of the teachers that I'm the closest with, and I still talk to her very often, had so many health issues, had to take time out of work because working in a school filled with so much mold was making her sicker and sicker every day. I remember a ceiling tile had fallen on a student's head before because the ceilings are crumbling. And that should not be something that students, teachers, staff, or the school community should be worrying about every day they go to school. It should be a safe space. And that's the last thing that students should be thinking about, is whether they're safe at school. They should only be thinking about their future and learning and socializing. And, so it's so much bigger too than, I know we haven't really gotten into the weeds of the numbers and the cost savings, but it's so much bigger than just the numbers. And I mean, school districts have the potential to save millions of dollars by doing this because they'd be generating their own energy. But it's so much more than that, so much more than the numbers.
And you're exactly right, Erica. It's more than numbers, right? We're talking about human beings. We're talking about people, and kids aren't stupid. They know that they're not being valued when their school's falling apart around them. And in the United States of America in 2022, to have any of our fellow countrymen and women going and feeling like they're not valued to the fact that they have lead or asbestos, or other, issues, mold in their school. I mean, that's ridiculous. This is a moral imperative. It needs to be done, and it needs to get done yesterday.
I mean, schools are the center of the community, right? I mean, how many of us interface with a school, how many times in our lives, when we're kids, when we're parents, and then obviously when we're working with the community itself. The schools serve as a sort of like central point for the community itself. I mean, the return on investment for these kinds of investments are monumental. I mean, we're talking about improving educational outcomes for kids. I mean, when the data shows over and over again that when they're working and living in and learning in healthy schools, their learning outcomes increase. We're talking about fighting climate change. We're talking about net zero schools. So we're bringing down those greenhouse gas emissions that come from fossil fuel use. And then we're improving the local economy by increasing access to these local jobs. And then we're saving districts money, right? If they're producing their own renewable energy, if they're bringing down their energy bills through energy efficiency retrofits, they're going to have less costs. And so, that allows them to redirect those dollars to other, learning necessities that are essential to help their kids, get those learning outcomes and those opportunities for the future generations that are going to be learning in those buildings.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think we have examples of that as well. And when we look at the new high school in East Providence, it's a gorgeous building. I mean, I would drive out to East Providence just to take another lap around. It's a very beautiful construction, and the inside is just as good. And so we have like a sort of like case example in the state of what an updated and newly renovated building can do for students and community members. And so it would be great to just follow that up with more construction and more renovating. I think, Justin, you had touched on this, but like the average public school building in Rhode Island is what, 56 years old?
They're old. I mean, there's stuff that goes back to turn of the century in different places, and it's evident, right? And it is really, it's something where, I just want to touch on, anybody that's watching this or listening, if you're interested in becoming a part of the construction industry, come get in touch with us. Google Rhode Island Building Trades, Google Building Futures. You're going to come right into it, and you're going to see that there's an opportunity for you if you're willing to, go work hard and be open-minded, that you can have a great career path that, quite frankly, in my life brought me out of a situation of, poverty or next to poverty into a great middle-class living. And that's what it's all about for us, is being able to, represent our members, and then, give opportunities to other people to make sure that, we're doing the right thing. So, and we're very happy and very lucky to have, the opportunity to work in coalition with people like Priscilla and the environmental community, to be able to say, look, we're going to align our interests, and we are, in the classic understanding of a union, we're stronger together. So, you know.
Well,
So,
I can certainly provide the information for the Building Futures program in the show notes and at the end of this in our post. And you just brought up the coalition. I would love to talk a little bit more about how this joining of labor and other allied groups came to be. Maybe
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I'm happy to start. I think we've been at this for a little bit over a year now, which is really exciting to see how we've grown, and that we can see that on the screen with bringing Erica and Mike on board to work with and for the coalition. So, I mean, I think that what I'm speaking for myself and also as an advocate, and what we were seeing in the environmental community is that on our own, it was really tough to pass policy. And then I think that there was a lot of energy spent on the areas where we didn't agree, where there wasn't alignment, but not really maximizing the opportunity in the areas that we do agree. And Justin highlighted a lot of those, right? Like, we do want to see our economy thriving as we're addressing the climate crisis. So it's like we were all pushing for the same outcome, but of course our approaches were different. And I think just taking a step back and realizing that if we could really come together and really envision a green economy, and how we both, on the environmental labor side, we're pushing for this just transition, but just our approach and understanding was different. So I think one of the beautiful things about the coalition is that we've taken the time to form principles and goals, and realizing that we're not going to agree on everything, but the things that we do agree on, they're really great opportunities. And I think, just looking at the passage of the Act on Climate, just both adding our influence, our advocacy influence, and grassroots effort to seeing that through passage was really monumental for our state. We hadn't passed a single piece of energy and environmental legislation in over 7 years. So the Act on Climate came about. So the fact that passed, and it passed with very progressive lines, and saying you have to center labor in this robust stakeholder engagement process that the Act on Climate calls for. It's not only about getting to net zero, but it's also about how you're going to get there. And it says labor should be at the table, and also environmental justice in frontline communities that I know we'll talk about in a second. And then also realizing that our state faces many challenges, right? How do we center socioeconomic issues, racial inequality issues? There's a really great opportunity in being able to work together and bring in all of our different perspectives. So I'm really excited about what we've accomplished to date. And now we're in our second legislative session, and I know we have a lot of exciting things to come. But I'll stop there, and Justin, others, feel free to chime in.
Priscilla, I think you really hit the nail on the head. And the reality is that there's far, far more that we work together on and agree on than we disagree on between labor and environmental communities. And there are people out there that, largely from outside forces, that want to exacerbate problems and want to create divisions. And that's not what we're about. We're about being able to come together to say that, again, we've got more in common. We've got more that we know we can do together, united, to move forward an agenda that centers people, that says, you know what, we're going to make sure that working people aren't left behind as we embrace new technologies, that we make sure we give everybody a shot, that we recognize the historic and ongoing injustices in this country that relate to, how people of color were treated and are treated in an unjust fashion, that we center, these ideas of social, economic, and racial justice. These things are needed. They're necessary as we talk about how do we create good middle-class union jobs, and how do we, make sure that we address this ongoing climate crisis. These are real things. And being able to have that opportunity, we know that, in addition to our ambitious political, and legislative policy agendas, that also working with environmental groups and coalition, we can do things like, be stronger in being able to organize the unorganized. Most people in this country want to be in a union, especially when you skew younger. I mean, look at this. We're a great crowd of people. I'm going to say all under 40 here, and not disclose any information about myself and my age, but it's younger people, especially in our country, in our state, are overwhelmingly pro-union. And so I'll just say another pitch here, that if you're interested in forming a union, you don't have to join an apprenticeship or join an existing union. You can form a union right where you work now, and we can help you do that. And I'm sure, again, you won't have to just Google it. Autumn can have some information that she puts up for you.
Yes. That's so well said. Yeah, I mean, our show notes are basically just links and links of how to just be in a union. That's the ultimate goal, right? Is that we have a more organized workforce and that we can give people the information to do that. But yeah, I'll find another link for that too.
Yeah, we want you to have a good, safe, healthy workplace where you're respected, where you can make a good living with benefits for you and your family. But also in doing that, you can help change the world for the better. So look at that. What could be better than that? You're helping yourself and your family and your community, your state, your country, and the whole world.
Wow. Well, that is a hard some speech to follow, Justin.
Well, that's it. Get organized.
So wonderfully put. I'm wondering, is there anything else that I've missed that people would like to include about green and healthy schools or the coalition or anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's something that we've touched upon over and over. We've mentioned equity, we've mentioned racial equity. So I just wanted to bring that back to the Green and Healthy Schools Initiative. So we've talked a lot, of course, about the science and climate jobs, but also what we've gotten at is that there is a disproportional disinvestment in communities. And we do tend to see that disinvestment in communities that bear the brunt of climate change disproportionately. So these are communities that are contributing the less to the climate crisis, and they often tend to be communities of color. And that's not, only the case in Rhode Island. We're seeing this across the nation, where communities of color or frontline communities or environmental justice communities, you might hear these terms, but what we're talking about is just that communities that have been disinvested in and are disproportionately exposed to carbon pollution. And these communities tend to be Black, Indigenous, and also can be low income. So what we're really trying to do with this initiative is highlight that there are certain community school districts that have been disinvested in. So whenever we're pushing for any policy solution is making sure that we're centering that and that those investments are first taking place in those communities. And I like Autumn and Erica that you shared, your personal experience and have, Erica, you highlighted a district that you grew up in that was disproportionately disinvested in. And then Autumn, you highlighted a great case study of what happens in a community that was disinvested and now has a thriving, case study of a school. So I think we want to see more of that. And we have the data on hand. We know, according to the Rhode Island Department of Health, where there are high asthma rates and, the correlations are there. All this is not happening in silo. Like when we refer to these environmental injustice issues that are happening in communities, schools at the center, but also home. And we're seeing the disinvestment across the board. So whenever we're pushing for any, infrastructure improvements and schools being a part of that, or building affordable housing or transportation or addressing transportation issues and healthcare issues, we really have to make sure that we are centering these environmental justice communities or frontline communities. I grew up in the south side of Providence, and just, the amount of carbon pollution that you are exposed to. And, as an adult now, I know the science, I know what the science is telling us in terms of climate change, and we can see where the carbon pollution is concentrated. But as a kid growing up, I would wonder, why do so many people around me have asthma? What's really going on? And now we know what's going on. So really, as Justin said, yesterday we had to be making these investments, and yesterday we had to really center equity and racial equity and addressing these issues. So, we're telling the state, the time is now to really do this work across the board.
That's right. And look, and I just say this, that, from my perspective, from the trades perspective, and from organized labor's perspective, it's unacceptable that there are still, disparities in communities of color. And the time is now. We are going to address this, and this is no longer going to be the case moving forward. The time is now.
And just to part of what we're doing through this campaign is we've been working on a presentation to share with different organizations, communities, school districts, you name it, regarding a lot of this information, a lot of this research that's been done. So we really highlight the effects that disinvestment has had on communities. And we talk about some of the health risks that have disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities, low income communities, and how that translates into education outcomes, but also extreme health risks. So if folks who are watching this are interested in getting that presentation, we're working on a running list of groups, organizations, places where we're going to give this presentation, which will hopefully be complete by the end of the week. I'm not sure when this will air, but it'd be really nice to be able to share this presentation with as many people as possible, because I think that we can say this and talk about it on platforms like Labor Vision and share with our networks all of this information until we're blue in the face. But until we get into the communities that are simply not understanding how that disinvestment is really critically affecting communities, we won't be able to make this happen. So we just want to make sure we get this presentation out to as many people as possible to share all of this research.
Great. Well,
Mike, you might, oh, go ahead, Autumn.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Erica, once Erica gets that information to me, it will be included in the show notes. So we'll be able to access it that way. But go ahead.
And I was just, I know, Mike, you mentioned we try not to get into the weeds, but I don't know if we wanted to talk a little bit more about what we're calling for, which I think at a very high level, we're calling for that investment, that down payment. So what I really wanted to focus on is that there is a cost to inaction, right? You know, if we don't do this, our economy will continue to be impacted, and we will see continued health risk that all of our communities will be facing. And as I mentioned, communities who bear that brunt disproportionately, our frontline communities will continue to experience that at a higher rate. So that's what we really also want to really focus for the state, that, like Justin said, the time is now, because if we don't, that cost is going to continue to go up. You know, climate change is only going to continue intensifying. And as the ocean state, we are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So things like sea level rise do have a very big impact on us. And every storm that intensifies, and now they're more frequent, we're going to continue seeing those impacts to our daily livelihoods and to everything that surrounds us in our community. So really, you know, we have to figure out, how do we invest in climate? And I think that the Green and Healthy Schools Initiative is a very simple first step that the state can take in really, you know, tackling that.
Totally. I mean, I think there's plenty of room to get back into the weeds if we wanted to talk a little bit more of the policy, like you said. So, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about some of these carbon goals. What does decarbonized Rhode Island actually look like? Like, what does it mean for Rhode Islanders?
Decarbonizing. Oh, go ahead, Erica.
No, I was just going to share one bit of research that we have been focusing on through this campaign, is the total CO2 equivalent from decarbonizing the public schools throughout the state. It would be an estimated 105,913 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year, which, for folks who have not been looking at numbers like this for a long time, what that means is that reduction would be equivalent to removing roughly 23,034 passenger vehicles off of the road. So if you can make that connection, this would really make an impact. It's like we've said before, this is just a first step. This is a starting point. It's not what's going to completely erase what has been done with in the climate crisis, but it's an extremely important first step.
Well, that's great. Mike, what were you going to add?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to bring it down to the car level. Everybody knows cars, right? Everybody sees cars. Think about it in the sense that you're just taking a bunch of cars off the road when we're decarbonizing. And, Rhode Island's Act on Climate, as Priscilla said, has a series of benchmarks. We have to reduce our carbon emissions 40% by 2030, 45% by 2040, and then, 45% by 2035, and 80% by 2040, and then net zero by 2050. I might have those numbers wrong. I have a hard time memorizing that, but that's beside the point. Basically, we don't want to have fossil fuel use by 2050 in our economy. And so along those lines, right, with the Climate Jobs Rhode Island Coalition is talking about how we do that just transition, how we don't go from 0 to 60 immediately, and make sure that the jobs that are, jobs of today are being, are continuing, while we're also talking about retraining folks and training folks into the jobs of tomorrow, right? So making sure that we're doing it in a timeline that works, while also meeting the science and also boosting our local workforce and increasing that access to those frontline communities, to those environmental justice communities, and prioritizing that transition in those environmental justice communities that have for decades borne the brunt of the environmental and justice impacts, and have contributed the least to that problem.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave off on, because we've just about reached our time. So I want to thank everyone for being here. This is an ongoing conversation, so I hope that we can continue to meet and talk about our climate goals and the climate justice work that we are all doing in this state. Never miss a segment of Labor Vision. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Labor Vision RI, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Labor Vision TV1. And as always, you can find us on our website at laborvisionri.org. And I will be including so much more information in the show notes below as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Autumn.
Good, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.